Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for turning out in such high numbers. Uh, I'm going to present today my master's thesis work, which I did under the guidance of Professor Wade Bradley. The title is Performance Analysis of WinLab Network-Centric Cognitive Radio Platform. We currently have the WinLab Network-Centric Cognitive Radio Platform is a programmable FPGA-based reconfigurable radio platform for which we currently have a proof of concept architecture. Before moving on to implementing a new, more efficient architecture, the aim of this thesis is to analyze the current architecture and point out the possible bottlenecks. So here's the outline of the presentation. We'll start with the basics. We'll see what exactly a cognitive radio is. We'll see what are the different implementation approaches the people are trying, and what are the architecture requirements for a cognitive radio. Then we'll see how these architecture requirements are satisfied in the WinC2R. We'll see a top view description, and we'll then go into a detailed operation of a basic block in the cognitive radio, which is function unit. After the operation, we'll analyze the performance of the function unit in terms of to find out the overhead which we incur because of the reconfiguration added. Then we move on to more system level simulations to find out the overall system performance. Based on these measurements, we have considered the future working last night. So what exactly is a cognitive radio? Cognitive radio essentially is an intelligent transceiver device which constantly scans the environment to tweak its own performance settings. It analyzes data which it gathers from the network around itself, and based on that it tweaks its operating settings to communicate more reliably and efficiently. An ideal cognitive radio or an ideal CR features include more than spectrum sensing. It can also include support for multiple technologies, support for multiple standards, and collaboration with other CR nodes who are in the network so as to utilize the network resources in the best possible way. The cognitive radio implementation architecture is still in a development stage. There are multiple approaches which people are trying to do. We list out here three main categories of these approaches. The first is the portable software platform approach. These platforms are essentially software applications which run on operating system based on the general purpose processors. Because of their software nature, they have high flexibility and high programmability. The ease of programming is high because they use high-level programming languages. The restriction on these portable software platforms is because they run on an operating system and a general purpose processor which may not be tuned to their requirements, they are often restricted in throughput. The second category of existing CR implementation approaches is reconfigurable hardware. These platforms use mix of various hardware devices like field programmable gate arrays or data signal processors or application-specific ICs to achieve high speed and high data rates. But the programming here done is more hardware level, which is more difficult to do than let's say in high-level languages. And the flexibility is also limited. For example, if you are running some application on FPGA and you want to change the nature of it, what you would have to do is essentially stop the application and run the new image again. So on-the-go reconfigurability or dynamic reconfigurability will not be supported in these kind of platforms. The last platforms are system-on-chip kind of platforms, programmable platforms. These use large array of parallel processors, special-purpose parallel processors. Here also the programming is done in high-level languages. The implementation is done using standard industry tools. The problem here is there are many kinds of platforms out there which are not exactly compatible with each other. They are very specific implementations, and hence there are portability issues as well. Based on the CR features like support for multiple technologies, there are several CR architecture requirements which any cognitive radio architecture must satisfy. Modularity. What does modularity mean? Modularity implies that the radio processing functional space is divided into independent blocks. But this makes it easy for us to add or drop modules as the implementation requirements or the standard requirements change. The modularity also makes it easy to achieve reconfigurability. The reconfigurability means that the data flow path can change when you change the technology, when you change the standard which you are implementing. Dynamic reconfigurability is more severe constraint. It implies that this change in data flow path should be on the go, that the system execution should not be disrupted when you are changing the flow path. Because of these modularity and reconfigurability constraints, modularity and reconfigurability logic, there is a lot of overhead logic that might be in this cognitive radio implementation. But still, if the cognitive radio architecture needs to support the standard technologies, even with this additional overhead logic, it needs to satisfy the constraints on timing, constraints on latency, the current standards impose. Example of such constraint will be the interface space timings which 802.11 standards currently impose. So it is necessary that every CR architecture and implementation should be evaluated for performance on the basis of reconfigurability, dynamic reconfigurability, and speed or latency until the architecture reaches maturity. In this thesis, we are trying to, what we have done is we have done the same analysis for the WinCTOR platform. We now move on to the WinCTOR architecture overview. WinCTOR achieves modularity by dividing the reader processing functions into separate tasks. It's a task-based architecture. It assigns these tasks to independent processing blocks, which are called function units. Each function unit or FU contains a processing engine which implements the core functionality of that FU, like let's say modulation. And then there is a unit control module block, which is a superfluous logic you need to add to achieve reconfigurability. The dynamic reconfigurability is assisted with the use of software. The data flow amongst these various independent FUs can be configurable using the two task-related databases called Task Descriptor Table (TD) table and Global Task Table or GTT. The UCM uses these two tables to achieve the reconfigurability in the data flow. Because of these features, WinCTOR currently has ability to support multiple standards. Right now, we have processing engine which currently implement only a slice of .11a live flow. We also see in the end that WinCTOR currently can support virtualization by time sharing of hardware resources. Here is the top view or overview block diagram of the WinCTOR architecture. The upper block shows us the software system components, which are essentially Xilinx soft-core CPU called Microblaze and its peripherals. The software currently contains the initialization and the configuration code for the FUs which are implemented in the hardware system components. All the FUs are connected using the processor local bus. This gives us flexibility in the data flow path. And every FU connects to the processor local bus using a standard interface implementation. We currently have 4 transmitter chain FUs called MAC-TX, the frame header TX, modulator TX, and IR50 TX. In the receiver, we currently have only 2 FUs, MAC-RX and the synchronizer RX. We'll now go into detail of FU operation, how the PE and UCM collaborate to achieve task processing and dynamic reconfigurability. Before an PE is activated with a task, the data is loaded into the input buffer, the data to be processed. Then the task is loaded into the task queue. Once the task is available in the task queue, the UCM task activation stage kicks in the operation. What it does is it fetches the task from the queue and schedules it for the processing engine. This process is indicated by the task valid signal. The task valid signal essentially indicates the end of the task activation stage. The processing engine then starts the task processing stage of the FU operations. What it does is it fetches the data from the input buffer and processes it according to the implementation. And the process data is stored in the output buffer. Once it is done processing all the data, it intimates the UCM that it is done by the task done signal. This finishes the task processing stage. After task processing, UCM starts the task termination stage, which includes figuring out which is the next destination for the data, which is the next FU in the data flow path. The UCM gets this information from the GTT table, and based on this information, it initiates the data transfer from the output buffer of this FU to the input buffer of the next FU in chain. For example, here the data will be transferred from FU1 out buff to FUN in buff. Having seen the 3 stages of the FU level operations, we'll now move on to the performance evaluation. What we want to see is for every FU, how much time is spent in the UCM stages and how much time is spent in the processing engine stages. We'll give a brief overview of the testbench system which we use. What we want to do here is simulate the behavior of the hardware system components. For that, we will model the software system components using a test bench. The test bench will contain the configuration and the initialization code. For the WinCTOR implementation, this configuration and initialization code is very large. It contains writes and reads to thousands of memory locations. Doing this manually is very difficult, hence we chose to do it by an automated test bench. Since we're using the IBM Core Connect standard bus called PLB, and we're already using Xilinx implementations of the interface to the PLB, for the sake of compatibility, we chose the Xilinx bus function model which is specifically designed to test systems which are with PLB-based architectures. This is the very basic long random level overview of the test bench with the Xilinx BFM, that is bus function model. What we see here is the bus function model processor. This simulates the behavior of the micro-based CPU in the original architecture. The test script contains all the configuration and the initialization code required. These instructions are transferred to the BFM processor, which executes them using the processor local bus. The BFM monitor will help us in verifying that the data is getting returned correctly to the all FQs. The aim behind the FQ level evaluation was to examine the data flow path, through the transmit and receive chain as the data frame progresses, and investigate the UCM overhead for each PE. So the parameters we measured were PE latency and the UCM latency. The experimental setup contains two nodes, like the one shown in the previous slide, which were simulated and connected to the RF interface ports. The node 1 sends data packets of fixed sizes, 500 bytes. This size was fixed arbitrarily, to node 2 and waits for the acknowledgement before sending the next packet. There is no concept of ACK timeout because we don't know yet the system latency. That's what we want to figure out, so we don't have ACK timeout. We have assumed a perfect channel between the nodes because the measurements which we are doing are architectural level, so the state of the channel will not be of that much consequence here. The clock rate with which the simulation was simulated was 100 megahertz. This is the best rate the micro-based CPU can work on. We'll see the data frame task flow in the transmit chain now. The data flow starts with the FU-MAC-TX, which is the first block in the transmit chain. The software writes the input buffer data to the MAC-TX and then activates it with the task send data frame. In our simulation, this is done by the BFM processor. The MAC-TX currently implements the .11 compatible data and ACK frame formats. So for a 500 byte MAC frame size, there is 74 byte MAC data, 472 byte payload, and a 4 byte checksum. The MAC-TX will format the data according to this according to the .11 format, and then transfer the frame to the header TX with the task TX data available. The chief functionality of the header TX is it will divide the frame into smaller chunks and process each chunk separately. For the first chunk, before it starts processing, it sends out the TX start preamble command to the FU RF50. This essentially starts the preamble flow on your RF output. Once the first chunk is processed, the header transfers the data to the modulator and activates the modulator with the TX mod command. The modulator does the modulation according to the configured scheme and transfers the data to the IF50. Hence we start seeing the actual data frame on the RF output. Since each chunk is treated as a separate task, which is scheduled periodically, there will be multiple instances of TX mod and TX IFP based on the frame size. We'll now see the data frame task flow in the receiver chain. The sync RX or the synchronizer RX is the first block. During the initialization stage, it has been activated with the RX start receive control command from the software or the test bench. What this does is it activates the synchronizer and it starts scanning the input port for the availability of the frame. Once the frame starts coming in, the synchronizer also divides the frame into chunks and transfers each chunk to the MAC RX. The number of chunks will again depend on the frame size, and with the last chunk it will activate the MAC RX with the RX MAC data pass. The MAC receiver will then process the whole frame, and if it decides that this is a valid frame of type data, it will generate a task for the transmitter chain saying that the valid frame has been received and that needs to be sent.
But the synchronizer also has FFT and the demodulator.
Yes, the synchronizer is currently a combined entity which implements from synchronization, receive FFT and the demodulator.
It's clubbed because of the implementation.
It's currently clubbed. We actually implemented them as a separate piece, but they are currently clubbed because of the resource requirement on the RX FPGA board. So for this task flow, what we measure is in each FPGA how much time is spent in processing engine and how much time is spent in the UCM. So we see that the first thing you notice that the UCM overhead for each FQ will differ according to the processing engine application. It is larger for the first three blocks, and you notice that the common characteristics of these blocks is the data transfer to the next FU. We see that the FFT, which is the last block in the transmitter chain, or the receiver, which is the last block in the receiver chain, which do not have any inter-FU data transfer, as we call it, they have very small UCM overheads. Also for fuse processing same or similar size of data, for example MAC TX and the header TX. Header TX only attaches the PLCP header, so the size difference is not that much. The UCM model will be larger with larger number of tasks. This is easily explained because with larger number of tasks, you will have extra instances of task activation and task termination stages. So what we take from this graph is for the fuse with data transfer in the task termination stage, the UCM model is always going to be, or most probably going to be larger than the processing engine latency. We already seen that the header divides the frame into chunks and it schedules each chunk periodically. Once the processing is finished for, let's say, the first chunk, before the header UCM just finishes processing and sits idle until the start time of the next chunk. This time of sitting idle is denoted by a few idle time. For this implementation, we measure it, and we have found that for almost all chunks, the 500 byte frame is divided into 11 chunks. For almost all chunks, the idle time is greater than the FU header processing time by more than 3 times. This shows that the UCM, which is a very resource-intensive block, is not getting is getting inefficiently utilized for a single 8/11A like flow.
Why is the first chunk taking longer?
Because the first chunk processing includes the TX start preamble task. So until the processing for that task is finished, it cannot send task and signal. We now move on to more system level performance evaluation. The aim of these experiments, this evaluation, is to model the system latencies, find an analytical equation for them, and find bottlenecks, if any. The parameters measured were turnaround time, routing time, and throughput. Will define these parameters as we go on. The experimental setup is very similar to the previous one. Again, the two nodes are simulated connected to the IO ports. The data frame transfer and ACK transfer is again the same. To better get an idea of the system latency, we varied the packet size for each transfer from 500 to 1500 bytes in steps of 250. This gave us 5 data points. The perfect channel has been assumed again, and the clock rate is stayed the same, 100 megahertz. We now define the measurement parameters. The turnaround time, or TAT as it is called, is time taken by the device to turn around from being a receiver to being a transmitter. So essentially, when we see node 2, the turnaround time will be the time when the data frame reception ends to the time when the ACK frame transmission starts. So the turnaround time is measured at node 2. The round trip time is time between any two consecutive data frames. This basically gives us the idea of the throughput the system can achieve, and we calculate the throughput using MAC frame size over RTT formula. What we are measuring here is how much useful data we are sending during one RTT time period. We now see the analytical equation for the turnaround time, that is TAT. The flow starts with the start of the frame at the synchronizer RF input interface. After some delay, the synchronizer RX block, if you will actually start processing the frame. When the frame ends, after some time, the end of processing also ends. We measure the TAT from the end of the frame at the sync input interface. So this this constitutes the first component in the TAT, which we call T-Sync RX EOF. That means the processing latency of the sync RX after the end of the frame. When the frame is completely processed, the frame will be passed on to MAC RX for processing. MAC RX will process the whole frame. This latency is denoted by T-MAC RX. When the MAC RX decides that the frame was valid and of type data, it will generate a task for the transmitter chain send ACK frame. The T at TX denotes the delay in the whole transmitter chain to get the first byte of output on the out on the TX as T output. So based on these components, we now see here the variation of TAT and these components with the frame size. The first thing to notice is the T-Sync RX here, that is the processing latency in the synchronizer after the frame ends, is the most dominant component here. And the turnaround time denoted by this line mostly follows the variation of the T-Sync RX here. There is no variation in the T-ACK case, which is the transmission latency of ACK frame. This is very intuitive because the ACK frame size is constant, and for a constant frame size, constant size frame, the transmitter will offer a constant delay. The MAC RX latency will increase with the frame size because the MAC RX processes the whole frame before deciding whether it is a valid frame or no. we see here that the T-sync RSUL, hence the turnaround time, do not have a very definite relationship with the frame size. Instead, it was found that these two parameters have an inverse relationship with the size in the last chunk of the frame. We utilize this dependency on the last chunk. So currently what we are doing is processing 4 RDIMM symbols per last chunk. This was the default setting. We have that setting and we've processed 2 RDIMM symbols per chunk. And the result is shown as here. For comparison, we also show the old T80 and old T-sync RSUF values. What we see here is that the turnaround time values are definitely been reduced, but they are still greater than what we would like them to be, that is the SIPS time. And the major reason is all the gains achieved because of the 2-symbol processing have been nullified by the sync RSUF latency, which itself takes more time than the SIPS time. We now see here the effect of frame size on the round trip time and throughput. These two plots are very intuitive. The round trip time mainly depends on the size of the frame on the RF interface. That's the major component.
So
and hence it varies linearly.
How do you explain the sort of like this goes up then it goes down?
This one?
Yeah.
Because that depends on the size in the last chunk. And the last chunk size will depend on what is your what have you configured as a chunk size parameter. So each frame is
So why did you change the chunk size?
because we saw that the variation in the turnaround time was depending on the size of data in the last chunk. So if you reduce the size of the data in the last
So
chunk,
this includes some sort of optimization, what you're saying?
yeah,
Changing the chunk size.
Changing the chunk size is sort of an optimization, sort of an improvement, which we tried to see what the effect was. But we still see here that that improvement hasn't helped us much to get the turnaround time closer to the SIPS time.
It's not clear still why would 1000 be less than 750?
Okay, so
So is that a kind of quantization effect that with 1000 you had a certain amount in the last frame?
yes,
Which
yes.
allowed you to the average, but this is measured over how many chunks?
So when you configure the chunk size, each frame will have different number of chunks. From what I remember, 500 frame will be divided into 11 chunks.
11.
Yeah, the 750 frame will be divided into 16 and so on.
Last frame could have some effect on the average. This number is the average T80 or what?
Okay, so what, in our simulations, what we did was we made repeated runs for the same frame size. Then we changed the frame size and again repeated the runs. So these values indicate the average over those runs when the frame size is fixed.
For all, in this case 11 and 1250 will have some other number.
1250 will have more number of chunks. Because essentially what you do is you divide the frame size by the chunk size. And whatever is the remainder is your last chunk size. So the main thing here is the processing latency in the receiver is not depending on the frame size.
Okay. So I guess at this point you're now finding that the latencies are more than required for 3 to 11, right?
Yeah, even though we have only a stripped down version of the .11 standard implementation.
Yeah, so do you have some thoughts on how to deal with that?
Though I don't know the exact algorithm by which the synchronizer implements everything, but the only thing I can think of is increasing the clock rate. But with the current platform, that is not possible. The synchronizer block is already very large, and to increase the clock, if you increase the clock frequency, the timing constraints of the FPGA will not be met. So for the current platform, I think this is the best performance that we can get.
So, did you say the synchronizer block has both synchronizer and FFT? And
It has synchronizer FFT D model.
So if you compare with the Warp platform, they have roughly the same type of technology.
Yes.
Right? So how do they do 8 to 11 standard through their board?
I think they use the Simulink blocks and they connect them to get a standard compatible implementation for the WAP code. And their Mac is in the processor, PowerPC processor on their FPGA, while we have our Mac in the actual FPGA fabric architecture.
And talk.
The next parameter which we varied in the system performance evaluation was number of flows which system is at a time processing. All these measurements until now were done for a single OFDM flow. What we do now is we increase the number of flows and see what is the maximum number of flows the current setup can support and what is the reason behind it. So here is a single flow setup. This we already gone through. For the second flow, we add another instance of the FU IF50 block, and we duplicate all the tasks in the first flow so that the data flows are independent. Of course, the processing engine will never know the difference between the different flows. The UCM takes care of it. So what we are doing here is the flows will get processed back to back. Since the MAC RX processes the whole frame in one go, the flows will get processed back to back. But in the header TX and in the mod TX, where the frame is divided into chunks, the flows will get multiplexed, which is shown in this slide. So this is for a single flow. We see that flow 1 is divided into, let's say, 4 chunks. Each chunk is processed and passed on to the next FU. For the 2 flows, after processing the chunk 1 of flow 1, the header is scheduled chunk 1 of flow 2. And because of this, the header and mod are now alternating between each flows. And the flows separate after the output of the mod. So we see here what we actually saw in the previous slide. Only we see here in the timing diagram and the processing latency format. So the flow starts at header processing. So this is the header processing latency. The mod processing latency after that, and the IF50 processing latency. The measurement parameter here is, what we are going to do is, to our original OFDM flow, we are going to add more flows and see when our original OFDM flow breaks. What do you mean by when the flow breaks? Is that what IF50 does is when it gets the data from the modulator, it processes it and it stores the data into FIFO. The data from this FIFO is read at constant rate, which is specified by the standard. Since we get the data in chunks, what we want to maintain the constant output stream, we want the rate at which the chunks are written into the FIFO also to be constant. This constant is achieved by using a variable called rescheduling period, and each chunks are scheduled based on this variable. The system time which we see here is essentially sum of all the processing engine latency between the instant when the header is scheduled the task and the instant when the data for that chunk task is written into the FIFO. So we measure the T6 parameter and vary the number of flows. We are varying the number of concurrent flows from 1 to 4. What we see here is the system time does not, for the original flow we are only measuring, does not get affected until the flow number increases to 4. The reason behind this, as you keep increasing the number of flows, the number of tasks increase and the tasks start getting queued up in the UCM. The same queuing effect happens in the header and the mod UCM. But what happens is, since header has a very small processing latency, the header is able to dequeue the task faster. But modulator takes a lot of time in the processing and even more time in task termination. Because of this, we see that when number of flows is 4, the task activation latency, where the second chunk task for the first flow is just waiting in the sitting and waiting in the UCM for other flow tasks to be finished, becomes very large. And because of this, the system latency crosses a rescheduling period, and the FIFO in the IF50 becomes empty and the OFDM flow breaks. So we see here that the bottleneck here was the FU mod task processing and task termination latency. The conclusions which we can draw from this work are, we see that the Winston architecture has modularity because of the use of FUs, and reconfigurability because of the use of task descriptor tables and the global task tables. We also saw that for a single .11 ALI flow, UCM gets inefficiently utilized. This indicates that if the implementation only is going to be limited to this flow, then maybe the UCMs can be combined. Processing 2 symbols per chunk in receiver improved the performance, but we saw that the processing latency in the synchronizer itself became the bottleneck. Also in the transmitter, the processing latency in the modulator PE and the task termination latency of the modulator FU became the bottleneck. So we see here that for better performance, to meet the constraints required by the standards. The PE performance needs to be improved because even if we reduce the UCM latency overhead to zero, for example, in the turnaround time, the synchronizer latency is crossing the SIPS time by itself. Also, the FU to FU data transfer, which is part of the task termination stage in the FU, is also becoming a bottleneck. For all the FUs which have FU to FU data transfer in the task termination stage, the UCM overhead is larger than the PE overhead, which is not desirable because UCM overhead does not contribute anything to the actual data which is going out. And for future analysis, it will be better if we have more PEs. Currently, we have only one flow implemented. If we have more PEs, we can simulate diverse kind of flows which have diverse requirements, and that will give us better results as to the architecture of the flow.